from the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Parents are paying close attention to what's in our kids' food these days. Two things we don't want: food additives and artificial dyes. But how bad are they, and how do we even spot them and avoid them? We got answers.
I had this friend recently who was talking to me about these food additives and telling me, how do I avoid them? Because every weekend there's a kid with a birthday celebration that her child wants to go to, and there's cupcakes who definitely have artificial food coloring in the frosting and things like that. And, honestly, it's about moderation, right? Because, again, these studies, they're not 100%.
Welcome to Healthy Children, the podcast for parents from the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho-Sanchez. I am a pediatrician and a mama figuring it out. This is a judgment-free space where all questions are good questions and the answers will hopefully be even better. Let's get started. Today we are talking food additives and artificial food dyes, and to do so, I have with me Dr. Steph Lee, who is a pediatrician and preventive medicine specialist. Steph, welcome.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Steph, we're so glad to have you. Let's start with the basics. What do we mean when we say food additives?
Right. So we're talking about the food additives and artificial food colorings, things that are added to foods that are usually for looks, for the color, to make them more appealing. And so a lot of these things have recently come under fire for whether they're actually beneficial and also if they're harmful, in fact, to children's health.
Yeah. And I mean, a good thing, right? Overall, that we're sort of scrutinizing and taking a closer look at some of these things. I think, part of the reason I was so excited to have this conversation with you is that I'm not sure that I'm totally clear on how much we know about each of these dyes and additives and the effects of health. So before we go there, tell me a little bit about where these things are found. I think some of us who walk down grocery aisles, think of candy, of colorful cereal, but how common are these things and where are they most commonly found?
Yeah, they are very common. Like you said, in the grocery aisles, you can see them in snacks, in cereals, and in medicine as well. And so one of the things that has come under fire is a lot of red number 3, red number 40, and you can see them commonly in pain reliever medicines, especially for children, if they're artificially flavored. They also add in the dyes to make them more appealing. And so, a lot of it is marketing. The food industry has added them because they want to sell them and make them more appealing, especially since a lot of these things are in children's snacks and foods, especially for pain medicine. If it's liquid, a lot of it is, colored for kids so that they'll be more accepting.
Yeah. And so that they keep coming back, right? And so that they grab us and stop us when we're walking down the grocery aisle and ask for, whatever their favorite snack is. So I totally get it. And at the same time, we have to be conscious of health. So tell us about the research, Steph. What does it say about the health effects of food additives and dyes in children?
Yeah, so when it comes to artificial food colorings, the FDA currently has 9 approved artificial food colors. And so they are blue number 1, blue number 2, green number 3, orange B, citrus red number 2, red number 3, red number 4, and yellow number 5 and yellow number 6. And so all of these are actually also approved for use in Europe, except for orange B. But in Europe, there are warning labels for health effects for red number 40, yellow number 5, yellow number 6. And so now the U.S. is kind of looking at these, especially under Secretary Kennedy. This is one of his issues, is food additives and the harms for children's health. So that's why, I definitely wanted to talk about this to see what exactly are the harms, right? And because Europe has already done some of these artificial food coloring bans and warnings. And so is that something that we need to do as well?
Yeah. And let me ask you, because you mentioned this movement, right? And recent political and policy changes. Are there actual changes in policy so far in terms of what the food industry is allowed to put in kids' foods versus not?
So currently the FDA does regulate food colorings, but actually The current dye registrations were made in 1960s and 1980s based on studies that were performed 35 to 50 years ago. So that's the other reason why this is such an important and long overdue look at these dyes, is because no one has looked at them in like 50 years.
Yeah.
And those studies at that time were not designed to assess neurobehavioral endpoints. So some of these things that are now popping up that we think can cause harms to children's health, right? And so one of the other ones currently that has already been revoked is red number 3. The FDA did ban its use in food and ingested drugs, but that was just announced in January of this year. And so food and drug manufacturers, if drugs use red number 3, still have a couple years to phase that out. And so it's really important that, we really try to look at what the evidence is. Red number 3, they found it caused thyroid tumors in lab rats because it contains iodine, which we know can affect the thyroid, right? And so because of that risk, even though there were no human studies that they could follow with this, because it's hard to isolate red number 3 alone and see if that is causing cancers. But because of that risk already notified in lab animals, the FDA decided to revoke that authorization that they had.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And of course, as you mentioned, hopefully more studies coming down the pipeline about all of these dyes and more actual regulations also coming down the pipeline. I do want to ask you, Steph, in addition to, of course, this very serious potential for tumors and cancer that you mentioned, I think in the day-to-day, at least in my practice, the issues that parents have asked me about include things like hyperactivity or attention issues or even allergies with some of these dyes and additives. What do we know about those links?
Right. The biggest thing so far has been the hyperactivity. This actually has not been an issue that's just recently discovered. They actually have been studying this since the 1970s. And one of the first ones that really looked at yellow number 5 was a study in 1994 by Rowe and Rowe. And so a lot of these studies are double-blind, placebo-controlled, which is the gold standard, right? You're trying to isolate and see based off of someone not knowing that they're getting a food coloring or if they're not getting food coloring, right? And so they did find that the yellow number 5 seemed to have a dose response, meaning the more that they got of that ingredient, the more they found irritability, restlessness, and sleep disturbance. And so that's when, they started thinking, we really need to look at these more because, again, with the registrations, it was 35, 50 years ago. And since then, there has been more studies coming out, not just with yellow number 5, but with blue number 1, number 2, and also a mix. Because a lot of times with the artificial food colorings, it is hard to isolate one specific one. So many of the studies have looked at them in combined ingredients. So like in fruit juices or something like that, where you can't really isolate all of them, but it's something that's commonly out there because you don't typically, unless it's like a medication or something like that, that may only have one. Most of these artificial food colorings come in groups. And so like with fruit juices and things like that, they'll be in combination. So the studies kind of try to mimic that to see what that effect is on children.
Fascinating. Seven, another thing I hear a lot, mostly online, to be honest, not so much from my patients, but a lot of people are pointing out that other countries regulate food additives differently. So I guess my question to you is, how does the regulation here in the US compare to other countries?
Yeah, so Europe does have more regulations, a little stricter for whatever reason. So all of the ones that the FDA has, they're all also approved for use in Europe, except for orange B. But Europe also has warning labels now for red number 40, yellow number 5, yellow number 6. Actually, there's 3 different colors used in Europe, but they don't use them in the US for some reason. Quinoline yellow, carmosine, and ponceau. So they do have regulations that say you have to have warning labels because they do recognize that there are health risks, except for the hyperactivity kind of endpoint, neurobehavioral endpoints. Most of the other health risks such as the allergenicity, the carcinogen cancer risk. Most of those are in lab research with animals, not necessarily with humans so far. And so that's kind of where the US, I think, has taken this mixed approach, because in children it's very suggestive, especially for hyperactivity, but it isn't 100%. And then for the rest of the carcinogenicities, except for red number 3, which the US has already taken steps on, right? Again, the other effects, there isn't 100% certainty. And so the US has taken a more lax stance with that to say, well, they're not proven to be harmful right now, so we're going to just allow them until, of course, this recent administration, which now has been more of a push to say, let's get them out and replace them, right?
Yeah. So I appreciate the difference in regulation and approaches. I do think the approach to business in this country probably informs some of the approach that even this administration has taken towards the food industry, which so far has been suggestive, but not really a lot of policy, which again, we hope to see in the future come down the pipeline. But I wonder, as we think through this and how different countries regulate it, is there less food colorings and additives in food for kids in Europe, for example? Like, does the difference in regulation actually result in people going to Europe and being able to buy candy or cereal or juice that is just quote unquote better or cleaner for their kids than we do here, Steph? Do you have a sense?
Well, I do think that there's probably more ultra-processed food, more junk food, as it were, here and available. I think that that's potentially part of the issue. For instance, Orange Bee is a color that's approved for use here in the US, but it's not approved for use in Europe. And it's approved for hot dog and sausage casings only. And so not sure if that's, one of the reasons why there are different food regulations. But here, hot dogs are a very American type of food, especially over the summer. And so that's one thing that may be different between here and Europe.
Got it. I totally get that. Like, they're mostly present in things that are very much a part of American diet, not so much part of European diet. So overall, you're getting potentially less by virtue of the foods that you're picking for your kids, right? That makes total sense. Now, say parents in this country want to reduce both additives and dyes. Where should they begin? And how do you keep balance, Steph, between convenience and cost while also prioritizing our health and reducing some of these exposures?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. The impacts of the food dyes, like we mentioned before, for children, what we know is really based on the activity and attention. There was just in 2022, the California Environmental Protection Agency Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment evaluated the literature to see if there was any evidence supporting the association of synthetic food dyes with adverse neurobehavioral impacts, and really saw that in kids, even if they had a diagnosis of ADHD or if they didn't, it did show some association with food dyes and their behaviors. And so when it comes to practical everyday advice, right, it's so hard to avoid some of these things, right? Until we wait for policy change or advocate for policy change, right? What do you do in the meantime? And so, a lot of these are in snacks and cereals and things that you normally should be limiting anyway for children, right? And promoting, healthy foods and healthy fruits and vegetables as much as possible. And so in that sense, it's almost easy because things that you should be eating normally don't have these food additives in terms of fruits and vegetables and things like that. And just limiting snacks and things that have those food colorings, right? I had this friend recently who was talking to me about these food additives and telling me, how do I avoid them? Because every weekend, there's a kid with a birthday celebration that her child wants to go to, and there's cupcakes who definitely have artificial food coloring in the frosting and things like that. And, honestly, it's about moderation, right? Because, again, these studies, they're not 100%. And really, the only one so far that's the strongest is on hyperactivity. And so it's looking at your individual child, do you have a family history of ADHD? Do you have someone who's at risk for potentially developing that just from genetics? And if you have that predisposition, you think maybe then it might be a good idea to cut them out as much as possible. Or if you start noticing that it is something that's affecting their behavior. We've sometimes seen kids with autism also have some crossover with hyperactivity. And so if you have a child who's autistic, then again, maybe that's someone you would want to be more strict about taking out and eliminating some of these food additives.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I think, the other thing is that a lot of times, even us as pediatricians, right? Like we say, yeah, fruits and vegetables. And it's sort of like this nebulous category that can be very boring for both parents and kids. And some of the marketing that goes on with snacks that are prepackaged, that are rich in colorings, right, is that they're very convenient too, right? So I think for us as pediatricians, as we work with families, what I have found to be really important is to be specific, right? Like pack a tangerine, pack a banana, pack a, cheese stick. Like, I think sometimes we're so busy that we don't really have a lot of ideas, right? We're on the go, and whatever's part of the checkout line is the easiest. So I think just having a few go-to things that are fresh, that are fun, and that your kids like can go a long way. And I know you as a mom know that very well as well. As we come to the end of our show, Steph, we like to end with what we call a parenting prescription. So when it comes to food additives and dyes, especially as we make choices for our families, what is something that you want all parents to remember?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that although there is evidence for some health effects with food colorings, it is still important to balance everything, right? Because there is a lot of food colorings in a lot of foods, and you feel a little stir crazy if you're trying to eliminate everything and be completely restrictive. So really just remembering, do the best you can and offering healthy foods as much as you can. And then if your child has a cupcake every now and then with some frosting on it, that's okay, right? Just take it as it is. And then also just pay attention to the regulations and see what's coming down the pipeline. And if you're somebody who does have a higher risk for neurobehavior type problems in your child, then, talk to your pediatrician and say, is this something that might be part of their treatment plan or part of their diagnosis and management plan to see if it's something that would help.
Yeah, so helpful. Thank you so much, Dr. Stephanie Lee, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And thank you at home for joining us. If you like the Healthy Children podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app and help us spread the word. Follow Healthy Children on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Healthy Children AAP, and be sure to visit healthychildren.org, the parenting website of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Healthy Children is a production of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Our creative team includes
Laura Alessio,
Catherine Beard,
Garrett Brown,
Zach Christman,
Ann Johnsos,
Kathy Jewell,
Claire Keating,
Doug Nagel,
Jackie Ortega,
Susan Stevens Martin,
Mary Claire Walsh,
Hannah Weston.
And our theme music was composed by Doug Nagel. We'll be back next week. I'm Dr. Edith Bracho-Sanchez. Thanks for listening.